Good afternoon. We're here to interview today. This is Sarah Honigwax. This is Alex Cherney, and my colleague is Barry Stallman. Our videographer today is Jeff Sharon, and we're interviewing Mrs. Honigwax for the oral history to be deposited in the archives of the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Centre. Mrs. Honigwax, for the record, to get it straight, could you spell your full name for us, please?
Honigwax.
And what was your maiden name?
It was Gross. Gross.
Gross.
Actually, the Hungarian spelling was SZ, to be exact. Yes.
How was it pronounced? Gross or
Gross? Gross, yes.
And your present address?
6255 Deacon Road, Montreal.
Postal code?
H3S 2P6.
Your phone number, please?
342-5722.
Please tell us your date and place of birth.
I was born in 1932, February the 10th, in Budapest, Hungary.
And did you grow up in Budapest? Were your early years all spent in Budapest?
Yes, I did, and I did have quite a happy childhood.
In Budapest, was there what one would call a Jewish area?
There was actually on that. It wasn't called the ghetto where we lived, but mostly Jews lived in our street.
And what was the name of your street?
The name of the street was. It changed when the communists came in. It was called. It's a very long name. Nagyatádi Szabó utca. Utca is street, yeah. And later on it was changed to Kertész utca. So when the communists came in, they changed the Nagyatádi Szabó to Kertész.
Do you recall what kind of house you lived in? Was it an apartment?
It was a house with a huge courtyard. I remember there were 3 flights, and most of the tenants were Jews. I remember playing in the courtyard, riding my bicycle all around and around and around.
In the courtyard?
Yes, and playing with the other children of neighborhood.
What was your father's name?
Michael.
Is that, how would you say that in Hungarian?
Mihály.
Mihály. And your mother?
Matilda.
Matilda, what was her
Cats.
Cats. What were their occupations?
Father was a baker, and later on he opened a little fruit stand on the corner of the main streets in Budapest.
Did he have his own bakery?
No, he
worked
worked for others.
And later,
yes.
when he opened the fruit store,
it was his, yes. Mother and father
and
worked.
Mother helped him
yes,
in the store.
yes.
And did you have brothers or sisters?
Yes, I have one brother at that time, a younger brother. His name is Emery, almost 2 years younger. Yes.
And where is he today?
He is in Montreal. Yes.
And you had another brother as well?
He was born in Israel in '48. He lives in Toronto.
He was much younger.
Yes.
Post.
Yes, we have 16 years. Right.
So going back to your street and your life as a little girl, what kind of school did you go to?
Our parents made sure that we did get the Jewish education because they were Orthodox Jews, and we enrolled in the community Hebrew school. There was only one in Budapest, I remember, so the girls and the boys were separate. And we studied there Hebrew and German. The second language was German, actually, with the Hungarians.
The primary language
was Hungarian.
Was Hungarian.
Yes.
These were second languages,
yes.
Hebrew and
yes.
German.
Yes.
And at home you spoke?
At home we spoke Hungarian.
Yiddish was not...
No, my mother knew Yiddish because she was from a village not far from Budapest. She was born outside of the city, but her father didn't know any Yiddish, only mother.
I see. You said that your parents were Orthodox.
Yes.
How did they practice?
Mainly my mother's side. And
what was the
they
practice of
kept
the-
kosher,
Kept kosher.
and actually, I consulted my brother. Some of the things, you just don't remember. So he was helping me, and he said that father was praying at home, put on the tefillin, and every morning he was praying. And of course, the synagogue went Shabbat, and so we were quite an Orthodox family. And that's why they wanted us to learn in a private school.
Were you pretty much, how shall I say it, the same as your friends? I mean, religious, culturally, were you
Not
in your
necessarily.
circle, were you all of a kind, more or less? Or were some people more religious or less religious?
Interesting. It's funny how I don't remember my friends. My friend was the piano. I loved music, and I had a beautiful grand piano. I studied music, and I loved it. So when I came home from school, the first thing was I threw my school bag on the floor, ran to the piano, and practiced.
You took lessons?
Yes, my music teacher was living on the same building on the third floor. And when I met her a couple of times, she said, my Hungarian name is Ibi. So, Ibi, you made a mistake in that lesson, you didn't play it right. She heard me on the third floor practicing, so she was telling me, and I didn't do so good.
What was her name?
Oh,
I'm making you reach way back, huh?
yes. What was her name? I can't remember her name.
Remember how she looked?
Yes, she was with a child's eyes. She was an older person. I'm sure she was about 35. And I liked her very much, very much. But I didn't study for a long time. I only started about few months, but I progressed very fast because I loved it. And of course, that didn't last long.
Economically speaking, how would you have class?
They were middle class.
They were
Yes,
you were comfortable.
they were
You
comfortable.
don't remember any privations?
No, no, not until yes.
So, how long did you stay in that girls' school? What was the name of the school? Do you remember?
I cannot remember the name. It was a community Jewish school, Jewish or Hebrew school, but I can't remember. My brother couldn't remember the name either.
Okay. How long were you there until?
Until grade 7,
Grade 7, so that
which
would
is
have
about
been
12.
12 years
12
old.
years old.
So that would have been really until 1944.
40, yeah, that's when it was
44.
interrupted, yes, yes.
So, what do you remember as, things that happened that disturbed the tranquility of your life going to school?
Well, in 1943, I guess the winds of the war or the Germans approaching Budapest were alerted our parents, and they sent us to a village which was called Batarci. It was in the Carpathian Mountains. That village was close to our parents, actually to my mother, because our great-grandfather was a rabbi there. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. And that village was mainly occupied by Jews. I mean, mainly Orthodox Jews live in that village. So our parents thought it would be a good idea to spend the summer with them. And we helped in the farm. We were sort of happy doing something different than we did in the city. Some farm work, helping our great-grandparents. We stayed there until the high holidays that year. And when we returned to our home, we realized that the people from that village were taken away to Auschwitz, just the same summer, to the death camps. So that was the end of that family.
Did your parents belong to any Jewish organizations, anything that might have been organized to give you news or to help or to...
Not that I know of, not that I remember.
Just the synagogue
Yes,
that they belonged to?
yes, yes. It wasn't the same life as here, for instance. It was completely different.
So you as a child didn't belong to anything either?
No.
To bees or any
No.
of these
No. No.
youth organizations or anything like
No.
that? Do you recall the feelings of the thoughts that people had prior to the actual arrival of the Germans in Budapest? The world was going up in flames around
Yes.
Hungary long before 1943.
Right, and
what
we
do
didn't.
you remember?
We were protected from all this news. We were not told anything. It was the children. My parents were not like today's, that the child grows up from day one. Right away, they are aware of things that's happening around them. We were sheltered and protected from any kind of unpleasant news. So we didn't really realize
So it
how...
came as a big
Yes.
surprise and a shock
Yes.
that something had gone very wrong.
Yes.
You had no idea that things were wrong. So you came back from your great-grandparents' village to Budapest after the summer in 43?
Summer 43, yes.
What were the events that transpired then?
We had to go back to school. We went back to school, and the school years were interrupted in March 1944. That's where started, when the Germans came in and took over the government. And at that time was when Admiral Horthy announced that he's quitting the Allies, and of course he was arrested right away, and the Hungarian fascists were armed at that time, very heavily armed by the Germans. So they took over the government, and they came down with new rules and regulations. They didn't trust the Hungarians anymore.
You say that your school year was interrupted. Does that mean that one day your parents said you're not going to school today?
Right.
Or did they send you home from school? Do you remember the actual...
I don't remember exactly, but they told us that
Your parents told you.
that this is what's happening, and we cannot go back to school anymore. For obvious reasons. By that time, it was known that that we were invaded by the Germans.
Do you remember first seeing Germans?
Well, were they, the first time I saw them when they came to pick up my mother, looking for Jewish women. Men were already in a camp, work camp, so father was already away. And that was the first time when I saw a German.
Germans in
Yes.
uniform.
Yes.
Do you recall the circumstances of your father leaving? How did that transpire? Was he told to report somewhere, or did somebody come to get him? How did they do that?
I can't recall that. It's amazing, you know, how you block out
Sure.
memories that
If I push you too hard for details, you tell me. Give me a kick, okay? And tell me the stuff. But he was away in a work
Yes, he
camp.
was away, yes.
Do you remember if you were in contact with? Was he in touch?
He was in contact with us because he managed to escape and lived under false papers that he acquired. I don't know where he got those. He always managed to get something to help us. One of those situations was that he managed to escape and lived in hiding throughout the war. So periodically he appeared, and just to show us that he's still alive, and brought food. And one of these occasions he bought the papers from the Swedish protection, the Wallenberg affair. That was one of these occasions. So we saw him, periodically.
Must have been a very bizarre
Yes.
life to lead, and so
It's
crazy. So your first view of Germans in uniform was when they came to take your mother.
yes.
Can you tell us about that?
That incident also was because the superintendent of our building pointed to the German soldier, "There is another lady hiding there. Take her away too." Otherwise she would have been hidden and not noticed. But as you know, that the Hungarians are very anti-Semitic. Very anti-Semitic. So she was, I remember her as it was just yesterday, standing in front of her house.
Janitor.
Yes. With her hands on her hips, being proud of what she did. Managed to capture another one and sent her away. Of course, we didn't know where she was going. And later on, I realized that she and her sister, our aunt, she lived across the road from us. They were both on the same tour, shall we say. They had to walk on foot because there were no trains available for the Jews. And she was telling us later that they walked and walked and walked, I don't even know how many miles, to this camp, Lichtenwörth in Austria, where she spent 6 months. And we didn't know where she was, of course. And fortunately for us, my brother and myself, that my mother's aunt, who lived in our building, took care of both of us.
Was she too old to be
Yes, she was.
drafted?
She was already over 50, or I don't remember exactly how old, but she was over the age of when the Jews were taken away. So.
What was her name?
Aunt
Yeah.
Esther.
Yeah.
Esther Esther Lebovich. And her father, not her father, her husband was taken to Auschwitz. And she came to live in our building with my grandmother. They live in the same apartment. Actually, our building was designated by the Germans as a Jewish house. What they did is they gathered all the Jews. Certain houses were designated as Jewish houses. And therefore we had to put families or relatives together in the same apartment. So we lived in very crowded situations. It was really fortunate for us because we didn't have to move out of the house.
Did people still go to work, or what did people do during that period, the adults?
Well, my father wasn't home.
No, but other adults who were in the building with you.
They kept working. They had to, of course, we had certain hours we could leave because we had this yellow star. Everybody got a yellow star. And the times were allotted for walking on the street and purchasing the food that we needed. So life went on, more or less.
You were probably too young to remember, but do you have any idea where did the money come from to buy food and whatever? But as you say, life did go on.
But our parents were quite well off, so money was never a problem. And father had all kinds of ways and means to get the food. He always found them.
So he would appear from time to
Yes,
time?
yes. And give us some ray of hope occasionally.
Did you know where your mother was?
No. We just later found out where she was taken.
You mentioned she was kept in Lichtenberg for 6 months?
6 months, yes.
And then?
And of course the stories that she was telling us are similar to all other camps. They were starving. And interesting that she kept kosher even in a camp, where by law you're not allowed to. If it's a matter of life and death, you can eat anything to sustain your. But she refused to eat pork. She gave her portion to the next inmate. And fortunately, mother was quite heavy. I think this is why she survived.
She had reserves?
Yes, yes. But she became sick with typhus with the other people when they were liberated. And my father found her. There was also a great search. Where is she? Which camp? She was taken.
Where did he find her?
I don't know how. I don't know how. But he always knew what to do, where to get it. We were taken to one of these houses, protected houses, at Wallenberg.
Who took you there?
Father, yes.
You and your brother?
Yes. With my aunt. We were always together.
I see, your aunt too. It wasn't just children, it was also adults.
Oh yes, oh yes. There were families there.
Family.
Yes, yes. It was a big building, big apartment building. And it was crowded with Jews.
When would that have been?
In the autumn of 44, around that time. Yes.
Not too long after the actual occupation.
Yes, yes. And then, of course, we moved in there. We lived a short time there. The Germans invaded that apartment and disregarded the protection papers, took the whole tenants, every tenant from that building, and we marched to the bank of the Danube, where thousands of other Jews were gathered already. To be executed, simply, and thrown in the river. Father, again, I don't know how he found out that we were taken away from that apartment. So he acquired, I don't know where from, another protection paper from the Spanish embassy. And the Spanish embassy was by the Germans. So he immediately came down and showed the papers to the Germans, to the Nazis. And this is how we were saved, taken back to the apartment, to a Spanish apartment this time. But the situation was there very primitive. That house was occupied already with thousands of people. We managed to get one room for the 5 of us. I had my cousin with us too, my aunt's son, who was about the same age as my brother. So we were always together, the three of us. And we were in a room with no furniture, nothing to eat. A sack of beans, that's all we had. So we ate beans every day. Beans for breakfast, beans for dinner, beans for supper, until Father appeared. He brought for dessert some freshly baked bread, which was, I cannot even tell you how happy we were to have a slice of bread. He always appeared like...
Father was certainly a remarkable guardian angel.
He was.
Under very difficult circumstances, wasn't he?
Yes, and then one of his stories, I remember, one of his appearances, he came completely wet from head to toe. So naturally we asked him, how come you are so wet? What happened? Oh, he was telling us, he never conversed with us, he didn't tell us exactly what happened. He said it was raining, heavy rain, and there was no rain at that day. So we didn't ask questions, Father said, that's what it was. Very obedient, always. Whatever Father said, that's what it was. Much later, he told us that he was captured by the Nazis, the same way as those others were standing near the bank of the river, waiting to be shot at. But he was an excellent swimmer and managed to jump in prior, just a few seconds before the shots were fired. And he swam underwater for a few seconds, a few minutes actually. He was a good swimmer until the Nazis couldn't find him anymore. And he came out of the water, and that's how he appeared. Yes.
Did you have any encounters or brushes with the Arrow Cross people, the Hungarian fascists?
Well, actually, those were the fascists that came and captured all the Jews. Yes. And so my memory is mixed up with the fascists, with the Nazis, with the Hungarians, it's.
How long were you in the Spanish safe house?
How long? Can I look at my
Yeah, of
notes?
course.
Maybe I'll
Must have been late 1944.
Yes,
That
yes.
you went in?
It was. We didn't stay there too long. It was late, till late, just before winter set in.
Right. So you
Yes.
stayed in this bare room eating beans
And the occasional
and
bread.
bread that your father brought. What happened?
And then, of
subsequently?
course, then in December 44, the Russian army arrived. And they started shelling the city. We spent the next 3 weeks in the shelters.
Was the shelter under that same building?
Yes.
In the
Yes.
basement?
And of course, I don't have to tell you how crowded it was. And the facilities were inhuman.
Yeah.
But that's
Were
very...
all Jews, or were there any
All
Hungarians?
Jews.
All Jews. in
All
there.
Jews.
Just the
Yes.
people from that
Yes.
building.
Yes. Yes. And then...
The shelling went on and on and on. You
Yes.
could hear it.
Again, oh yes,
Yeah.
bombing and shelling and I could hear it now. Constantly.
Did you stay afraid the whole time, or did you kind of get used to it after a while? Can you get used to such a thing?
You know, how can you get used to this?
Yeah.
But, you know, it's, we are creatures we are resilient, very resilient, and it's necessary. We have no choice. And maybe by blocking out those harsh, horrible occasions and episodes, that's one of the survival kits of our life.
So after 3 weeks of bombardment by the Russians, the city was captured?
We were, yes,
You were
the
there, right?
first Russian soldier came and told us that we are free. The city
You
was
came into the
liberated.
base-
Yes.
into the shelter?
That we could come out and breathe fresh air. And we went back home, of course on foot. But on the road, all the way back home, the corpses were stacked up by the thousands on the cities in Budapest, on the streets of Budapest. You can see them wherever you looked, wherever you
These
went.
soldiers
There
or
were
civilians?
corpses, civilians who could see. And of course the horses and everything was just in the middle of the road. And one episode comes to my mind that people were starving, so they went to a dead horse and cut off the meat. That was a delicacy.
Had your father reappeared by then?
Father, yes, yes. By then he was free and came. Then again he said, your children are going to go away until I look for mother. I have to find her and bring her back to you. So we were again sent away to another village in Hungary. It was called Mátészalka. That was my father's birthplace. So we knew the people in the village. And one of the families that we went to were Hungarian Gentiles. And we spent the summer with them. That was just like being in heaven.
You were 13 and your brother
Yes.
was 11.
It was, yes, right, right. So we had a good summer. We spent actually quite a lot of time there because it was a long process until father found mother.
How did he go? Do you
I
know how he-
don't
he
know.
never talked
I
to you
never.
about it?
He was organizing children's to feed the children. He was organizing train loads of food to feed those hungry children. And
Where did he find your mother ultimately?
he found her in that Lichtenwörth in
that-
Austria.
she's-
Yes,
She had been there all the...
yes, all this time. Yes.
What kind of condition was she in when you
Oh,
brought her
no,
home?
she was unrecognizable.
From the sickness? from
Yes,
the
his
sickness?
skin and bones. Father didn't even, he didn't recognize her. She had to call his name for him to see that really is his wife. And she was sick with typhoid. Then he, right away, again, managed to get some medical help. I don't know, honestly.
Just to put it in perspective, how old would your father have been at that time?
Well, he married when he was 22. I was born in 32. So 30. I'm 45. 45, 46.
Very active.
Very active, yes. He just wouldn't take no for an answer. But always found a way to gather food from under the earth. I honestly don't know how he did it. But he had connections, all kinds of connections.
So he brought your mother back to the house?
And while mother was recuperating, we were sent again. Children. This time he managed to organize the train load of children to spend the some time in Debrecen, another city in Hungary. There were only children there, and we were fed and clothed. It was a cozy atmosphere.
Do you remember under
Until-
what auspices? Who is it? A Jewish?
I don't.
The joint or joint distribution? Or
No.
anybody? You don't know.
Details like this, I can't remember. But he said us that it's better for us to be away until he finds mother and refurnishes the apartment, because everything was empty by the time we left. We came out of the shelter. The apartment was completely ransacked. He wanted us to come back to a normal situation, with mother recuperating. And he did manage to do that. It took a few weeks or few months, but when we came home, the reunion was amazing, really. And we saw mother, practically no hair on her, a little bit of hair, but she was quite gaining her little more weight, and she was recognizable. And slowly was trying to heal the wounds as much as we could. So about a year we stayed in Budapest, and then parents decided this is no place for the Jews. They've had enough. We better move away to Palestine.
Before we go on, just a little
Yes.
side note. Do you have any idea what happened to that lovely janitor in the building?
I wish I could remember what happened to her.
She obviously wasn't around anymore. So
No.
you don't know what her fate was.
No. Oh, do I see her in front of me? A tall, like an Amazon she looked like, she was...
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
That's all right. It's all right. So again, we were moving. We joined a Zionist organization, it was called, that were planning to leave Hungary through a ship which was boarding in Zagreb, Yugoslavia.
Did your father reopen his store, or did he?
No.
He didn't work.
No. He didn't, because he was too busy doing all these organizations and coming and going and constantly busy. So, where was I?
Ship to
Yes, to Zagreb. I heard that they're going to move. My love was the piano. That piano was my friend. I cherished that piano. I loved it. So I started to cry. I was very unhappy that to leave my good friend behind. So my uncle came over. That was my father's sister's husband. And he said, "Don't worry, Ibi, don't worry. You will have another piano, you will study. You don't have to cry." But I was crying. And packed up, took the train ride to Zagreb, which was a 3 days ordeal. Usually the train ride takes about 4 hours from Budapest to Zagreb. It was 3 days. A cattle car, cattle train, whatever you call it. We arrived in Zagreb. We were put up in an unfinished school building that had no windows, doors, or even stairs. And winter was approaching. we had to wait for the ship to take us to Palestine, and it took 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks. We stayed in under these circumstances with no windows, not even toilet facilities. The toilet facilities were outdoors, the latrines, you know, those. And very painful.
Do you remember what passed the time?
Hmm. Just one occasion, I don't remember. I don't remember what we did. We were so cold all the time. We stayed under blanket most of the time. One of our acquaintances had a duvet. Duvet was considered something
Luxury.
absolutely. So I was tucked under the duvet, warm and cozy, most of the time because it was very cold. I mean, imagine no windows, no doors, nothing, and the wind was blowing. It was just terrible. I don't know how we spent the 3 weeks. Again, the blockage. Until finally the ship arrived. It was a coal-fired cargo ship, about 4,000 tons, which had to carry 4,500 refugees. So, needless to say, we were like sardines on that ship. And our journey was about 4 weeks. 4 weeks.
And it stopped in other places? Or
No.
You were on the water for 4 weeks?
Yes. And we had enough food, you know, cans and all kinds of. We were given enough food, so there was no problem.
Were you all Hungarians, or were there mixed?
I think most of us were Hungarians. Yes. It was organized from the the Zionist movement. And as we approached the port of Haifa, suddenly we see that we are surrounded by the British Navy. And right away they boarded our ship and ordered the navigator, the captain, to take us to Haifa. And because there were some young Zionists were on board, they were quite, how should I say, they did not right away agree to whatever the British were telling us. So they put up a fight. But how can you fight? With what are you going to fight? So I remember they were throwing the huge cans of food we had, those 2 kilos, or I don't know what we did, meat, and they were throwing those away to the British. And we were hosed down, and with tear gas, and whatever means of cruelty they can do. So we reached the port of Haifa, and we were forced to board their vessels. We were divided into 4 vessels, and taken to Cyprus, to Famagusta, where the British were already having a camp for the refugees, some legal, some illegal. They had the rule of releasing refugees every month, a quota, about 1,500 every month. Out of these 1,500, 750 were legal refugees. So our time was quite away until
Legal refugees meaning what?
that
They
were
had
had
permission
permits,
to
yes.
go to Palestine.
Yes, yes. So we spent about 10 months in these camps, but they were not wasted. The Palestine underground came there disguised as refugees, and they taught us Hebrew and means of protecting ourselves, including combat and generally learning, so that the time shouldn't be wasted preparing us for the
Pioneers.
yes,
Colonists.
yes. And of course, some men right away came off the boat to the war, and they were killed. You know, they never managed to be citizens of Israel. Our parents were forming a kitchen in the camp. So they were busy cooking to the people. And they were quite good. They were quite good. And some art classes, crocheting, knitting, and all those things that people do usually. So food we had, there was no problem of starvation there. It's just a matter of time when we're going to be released. So
Were you in wires, or
yes,
were you
yes.
weren't allowed to
No, it
roam?
was surrounded by barbed wires. Yes, yes. And I remember I became ill, and with high fever, so I had to be transported to Larnaca. It was, I think, Larnaca. Taken to the hospital, and I had rheumatic fever. But of course, at that time, they didn't know what to do with it. As a result, I have a valve, dysfunctional valve, in my heart. But I can live with it. The scars were much deeper. Those cannot be cured. So when our time came to be released from the camp, and fortunately we were among the 750. We were taken to Atlit, which was not far from Haifa, where we were processed as refugees, quarantined, and all those things that necessary to get out to the free society. We spent about a month there. Another month was spent in Kiryat Shmuel. I don't recall what we did there. But finally, after all this, we were set free and ended up in Haifa. And of course, that was a time where just brewing before the War of Independence. And I don't know. Anyway, what else do you do you want
Did
to?
you go back to school at that time?
I couldn't go back. I went to night school because I had to work. Oh yes, an important factor I forgot. I was supposed to go to a school away from home. To continue my education. And the father comes to me and tells me, "You're not going anywhere. Mother is pregnant, and you have to stay home to take care of her and the baby." I was very upset. Not because she was pregnant, my mom was pregnant, but because my life was interrupted again. And of course, we never dared to say no. Whatever father said, that's what it was. So instead of my going to the school, my brother, Emery, went. He didn't like it, so wasn't a long time that he spent there. So I stayed home. I went to night school to learn properly the language, and I studied secretarial positions, or I don't know how you call it. In the evening, in the daytime, I had to work to support. Because father, of course, didn't work. He didn't. Just later, he got a job on the sim lines. That he was a chef. Being a chef, he was already qualified. So he was a chef on the sim lines, and he was away most of the time. Okay, that's why he wanted me to stay home. So I worked in two places in the daytime. In the evening I studied.
What about the piano?
Never took up the piano. Never didn't have a chance. And the money we didn't have. I mean, it wasn't important at that time, right after the war. Who even was thinking of taking music lessons? That wasn't important. You had to live, to make a life for yourself. So my brother was born in April '48. And of course, I was his mother. We went out, the three of us, my brother and myself and the baby in the carriage. We looked like a young couple with a child. People were looking at us. Look at them, how young they are, and they have already a baby. Oh, I loved him. I still do.
But it was frustrating in other ways at the same
Yes.
time.
Yes. Yes.
So that was in 48 he was born.
In 48, yes.
What happened? What happened after that? You were 15 then? Or no, 16?
16.
16.
16. I was working, working, and helping home. And when I was 17, I thought maybe I can go to the army to serve like others serve in the army. I was looking forward to that. Somehow, I don't know why, I wanted to be away. So because of my heart condition,
You couldn't take him.
I couldn't. And 19, I married. I married Joseph Mermelstein, who was a family, my mother's family. Remember the rabbi, the Rosh Yeshiva was also Mermelstein, so we belong to the same family. He was my mother's second cousin. And
How old was he?
he was 30.
He was 30. And you were 19.
And during these times, my father could not settle down. He just couldn't settle down. He didn't know the language. And so his mind was working again, thinking what to do next. He proposed a new deal. For this, I found out later what it was, because I didn't know at that time. They're going to go back to Hungary. I married in 51, and in 1952, they went back, taking my two brothers, back to the communists. When I found out about it, by reading the morning paper, no names were mentioned, but I knew right away that they decided to go back to Hungary.
Was there a number of people? Or
Yes,
yes. Kind of
yes,
a movement back?
yes. But not the Jews. There were some Gentiles living in Israel at the time. And they went back to Hungary. And I was devastated. They were telling me that they're coming to Canada. So, that's fine. So I had very rough years after that, because I just couldn't understand how can they go back to this country. What we've gone through after all that, still decide to go back. It was unimaginable. Yes. So 1956, when the revolution came in Hungary,
Were you still in
I was in Israel.
You were still
Yes, yes. My daughter was born in 54. And so mother was asking me, this is the opportunity for them to reunite. What is my opinion? They were very upset about what they did to me, and they were begging my forgiveness. You know, it was one of those situations that they knew, they realized it's something. They did something very, very bad. Not just for me, for themselves, you know, to go back to the place where there was so much horror and devastation. So they asked me whether to come back to Israel or to go to Canada. But that time was a very bad time in Israel. There was Tzena, you know, the Tzena times where everything was rationed, food was scarce, and there was no logic in coming back to the country, and they will struggle again. So I told them, choose this time Canada.
Did you have people here, relatives?
Nobody.
Nobody here.
No. But they had the choice. As refugees, they could come.
In 56,
Yes.
during the
Yes.
revolution.
Yes. My brother escaped from Budapest, and somehow he ended up in Denmark. And our parents didn't know where he was. And I was the mediator between them. My brother wrote me a letter asking me where my parents are, because he couldn't contact them. It was impossible. And so I told him that mother and father are planning to leave Budapest and coming to Canada. And the meeting place would be in Vienna. So if you could go there and this times, then you'll see them and you'll come together. This is how they met again and came to through Halifax. I guess they boarded the ship through Halifax and ended up in Toronto. And in '59, we came out from Israel.
Under what auspices did you?
My parents,
They sponsored.
yes, they sponsored us, and my husband actually was a British subject because he was in the army. He served in the British Army.
British Army in Palestine.
Yes, yes.
So it was easier.
So he could. It was easier, yes, and he could work right away. He knew English, of course, and
So you all met in Toronto again.
Yes.
Reunited in Toronto.
yes,
You had the one daughter.
yes.
Did you have other children after that?
No.
Do you remember your first days in Toronto, how it was?
We lived together for a while.
As parents and
Yes, and it wasn't very cozy. The three of us there, and but we knew it's only temporary until we find the accommodations. So a few months later, we did find an apartment, and I started working in a factory before my husband did. 2 weeks after we arrived, I started as a finishing some coat factory. Whatever it was, I didn't matter, as long as I earned some money. And then my husband found a job as an electrician. He was handy, so he was worked in the CBC in the supply room or whatever it was. Again, not too long. Then he went to the teachers' college, and he became a teacher. And I started working in the Hebrew school, the Associated Hebrew Schools in Toronto, as secretary. because needed bilingual secretary. And I worked there for 12 years. So, if the stories, I can go on and on and on.
Would you say that your arrival in Canada, your integration into Canada was a good experience?
It was.
Or
It
difficult?
was. We did find some ex-Israelis. Our friends were ex-Israelis. They came earlier than we did, so we were.
You had a network.
Till today, we keep in contact.
Yeah.
I am in contact. It's.
What happened after the war with your parents? Were they still alive, or had they passed away?
Yes, in 1980, mother passed away from a liver ailment. She had a cancer of the liver, and 2 weeks after that, my father passed away. That was, and before that, my husband, in 1980, died. He was only 59.
You lost a lot of people in the same period.
Yes. So I decided to go back to Israel in 84 and stayed there until 90. I saw my grandchildren growing up. It was.
Your daughter was.
Yes. Or she went back when she was 23. She decided that her life is in Israel.
She stayed attached.
Yes.
How old was she when you came to Canada?
She was 5 years old.
5, but it's stuck in her memory.
She didn't have enough challenge in Toronto.
So you went back. You went to Israel in
84 went
84
back, yes, until 90. That's where I met my husband. And he happened to be from Montreal.
You met him in Israel.
Yes, he has a daughter in Israel. I was visiting there. So I came back to Canada.
And your second husband's name
Is Jacob.
Jacob Honigwax.
Yes.
Is his background similar to yours in any way?
He is from Czechoslovakia, but he managed to escape the camps. He was forging his identity by coloring his hair to red, and he's handicapped. His one foot is damaged as a sickness, as a result of the sickness. So he managed to get away from the Germans. He was like a goy living there. And he came to Canada in what year? Oh, they went to Israel again for a year and a half. I think it was all told a year and a half in Israel. Then he came to Canada in 52, I think it was. Ever since.
So you had an interesting but not very happy adolescence. Looking back on the events that shaped your life, how do you see things now?
Well, of course, my part of this life is very happy. I don't miss anything, except my children. Of course, they're in Israel, but I visit them twice a year. And I think of my grandchildren. I love them very much. Liron, Amitai, and Doron. That I hope that they will appreciate the good life that they have, and they'll never shouldn't experience the horrors of what we went through. So this is for you, children.
Do you talk about your childhood much with friends or?
Oh yes, yes, but not what I did today, not to this extent. No.
So you talk to your daughter about it? Is she?
Oh yes, yes. She knows.
She knows.
Yes, she knows.
I know that a lot of young Israelis are rather impatient with that stuff, but
Oh
that
yes, she
she's
knows.
in
Yes.
tune with what happened.
Yes.
After we've concluded our interview, we'd like to see some of your photographs that you brought with you, and some of your memorabilia, which will form part of this history. It's been a privilege for Barry and me to hear your story and to meet with you and to share some of these very painful and touching experiences. And we share your hope that none of our children or grandchildren will ever know any of these things firsthand.
Right.
But it's important for them to know them secondhand, like we're doing today.
Thank you for listening to me and giving this opportunity
Thank you.
to be taped.
This has
And
been an interview conducted for the Montreal Holocaust Memorial Center by Alex Cherney and Barry Stallman. And the interviewer, the videographer was Jeff Sharon. The date is November 28th, 1995. And we thank again Mrs. Sarah Honigwax for her time and for her memories that she shared with us. Thank you.
these are my parents in their happier days.
What age?
They were about mid-30s, I think. Yes. This is a photo from my second grade from the community Jewish school in 1939-40, with the teacher in the middle there. And I am standing the second row, the second from the left.
I would have mentioned your friend in Israel.
And most of the classmates, I know them all, of course, but the only one I remember that I met in Israel, was very exciting to see her. Not just recently, which was many, many years passed by. We recognized each other. This was taken in Cyprus, in front of our barrack. As you see, father is painting the door, mother is knitting, as always. She was always knitting or crocheting or doing something handy. And my brother and I, it was in the summertime. As you see, this was my wedding picture. It was taken on top of our building and by an army rabbi. And the gentleman on the right with the beard was my father-in-law in 1951. This was taken in Toronto, and my brother was a bar mitzvah. And you see my daughter in front. It was a happy, happy occasion.
Is that your father on the far right?
My father is on the right, yes, and mother on the left. And my other brother, who lives in Montreal, is just beside my father, next to my father.